We have a really good discussion tonight on suffering, why it exists, and related themes of sacrifice and struggle. And before we start, if this is your first time here, I am Susan, and underneath, I think, is Philip, who co-hosts the Neogenian Oculus with me. And we have a guest tonight, Jan Damon, who has their own channel, and we love having Jan on. This is going to be great. We've already been talking for an hour on this subject. Jan, put your link in so that I think you can, so that everybody can go to your channel.
Okay.
And yep, just throw your link in there. Thank you so much to, I think, Elise, who gifted a membership. That's really appreciated.
Yeah,
You
thank
guys have
you
been,
to everybody who supports that way, but please
yeah.
like the video if you don't want to support monetarily, but we appreciate all the super chats and gifted memberships. You guys have been great, so it's nice to see you all.
Yeah, thank you for coming. There's a lot of people here. Just quickly, we'll say hi to no particular order. Hi, Laura and Becca, and hi, Morg and Archetype, Tyler, Lisa, Lucifer, Antichrist, Superstar. Hi, Kate, and there's Altier, I think.
Hello, Mark. Thank you for modding for us
Oh
tonight.
yeah, and Elise, thank you guys for coming in and modding. We really appreciate it. I don't know if there's anybody I missed saying hi to. We have a great topic, so we will come back and chat with you guys. Please write your comments down below. This is a very big topic on why suffering exists, and where we have, like I said, offshoots of different themes. So should we just get right into it, you guys?
Sure.
Yeah,
Take it
let's do
away.
it.
Okay, so most everybody at some point or another looks around and says, wow, there's a lot of suffering out there. And I divided it into two different kinds. What is inherent in nature and what is man-made. In terms of the way nature, meaning the way the world is without us intervening, I think the first thing a lot of people think of, if you talk to people and say, why does suffering exist? If they're religious, especially, the Judeo-Christian, you're going to get an answer of, well, it's sin, God created everything and man sinned and we got thrown out of the Garden of Eden and suffering began. That's the explanation of why suffering exists. And Philip, I know you have a lot to say on this. Yeah, more apples and snakes.
Well, I know you didn't really have a religious upbringing, but Jan and I did, and I think it's important to comment and make the point that religion itself is propped up by suffering. And just like what you were saying, if there's no sin and no need to ask for forgiveness, the entire mechanism of religion would kind of be useless. It wouldn't exist in the way that it does. And so, if there was no sin and no suffering and all of that, it would basically be a heaven on earth. Earth would be perfection. And of course, we know that that's not the case. And religious ideologies, they promise that that will eventually happen, but they have the contingency of a second coming of Christ.
Mhm.
And so, what I'm trying to say is, when you're talking about religious ideologies, they're perpetually striving to be clean, to be sinless, in order to earn that entry into heaven, into this perfected world. But it's important to note that religion is a machine of perpetual suffering, because you constantly have to remove that sin from yourself, and it brings the guilt, it brings the shame, and we see that reverberate throughout the world. There's consequences of that throughout the world.
I think it's also interesting that the idea in Christianity of the sacrifice of Jesus to take away all of the sin, and yet you still, it didn't really do too much. You still have to, behave a certain way in order to get to heaven. You have to behave yourself, you have to believe in Jesus, you have to believe in God, even though that immensely horrific sacrifice was made with a lot of suffering.
Yeah. Well, since you're talking about sacrifice, the biggest sacrifice in all of history that everybody first thinks of is the crucifixion.
Mm.
And so when I was, up and coming in a religious household and I was religious, towards the end of it, I was starting to see a lot of contradictions. I was thinking to myself, if Jesus was the Son of God and there was this all-powerful God, why could they not just forgive all sin and erase it all at one time, either before or at the crucifixion, and then just be done with it? And so the very fact that there is sin and you have to continually ask for forgiveness and, become clean to get into heaven and whatnot, that kind of asks the question, doesn't that make the sacrifice of the crucifixion, a sacrifice in vain? Doesn't that make it a waste?
Yeah.
And so I always thought, could God not forgive people before the crucifixion? Because religious people will always say, well, the crucifixion was Jesus giving his life for us so that we may be forgiven for our sins. And so in my mind, 13-year-old me, I was always thinking, well, if God is so powerful, did he not have the capability to, forgive people before then? Or was he not willing? And that's led to, like I said, a millennia of suffering and guilt and, the fear of hell. And that is a huge part of suffering. People,
Yeah.
whether they're unconscious of their suffering while being religious, that guilt and that fear of hell, it really is a form of suffering.
Yeah.
Religion is something that I think of as a man-made mechanism to sort of romanticize suffering, in a sense that it's even, I would strictly say, not strictly, but in a sense, applied to slaves. It's a system to make slaves comfortable and cozy with their position and their status of suffering. Religion tends to make you think that you have to pay suffrage in order to receive salvation.
I think the whole idea of sacrifice, which is so inherent in history, um, itself is a really interesting theme. That life was suffering was life existence is difficult, and that idea of we need to appease someone, we somebody needs to suffer so that we can have prosperity, so that we can be safe. There's terrible things that happen in the world. There's volcanoes and earthquakes and floods, and I mean, I'm talking now, but also ancient history. And the idea crops can fail and we'll all starve to death. The idea of somebody needing to sacrifice something, like I said earlier to you guys, it's like, take this goat, please, take this goat and make our lives okay. And I think that that's this need for somebody to take that responsibility, to suffer, to
Yeah,
sacrifice.
it's an externalization.
Yeah, and I think that that's why, where that came from. And of course, with Jesus, that was just um, that was just a way of trying to alleviate some of the horrors that came with existence. However, and the sin that happened, with the being kicked out of the Garden of Eden. But like you say, it seems so senseless, so unnecessary. Why is that to appease that part of us that thinks that secretly or so deeply in us that some kind of sacrifice is necessary, that, oh, well, somebody needed to suffer. Although to begin with, the entire idea of eating an apple, or this, that's symbolic, but getting knowledge and being kicked out is ridiculous to begin with for that.
Yeah. Well, I think also the way that you're talking about humanity hanging on the idea of sacrifice, and the same thing with what Jan said about it being romanticized. I do think that we romanticize sacrifice, and it's deeply embedded in our mythos as, the species of humanity. We see it in our art, in our movies, in all kinds of different aspects of life. But not only that, we also romanticize sacrifice, or at least religious people do, by wearing a crucifix, and
Mm.
that's always seemed a little bit funny to me, or ironic, because I always kind of think, if there was a second coming of Christ and he did come back and he saw all these people with crucifixes on the walls and around their necks, these golden idols literally of his death, I think, somebody would be appalled to see that and not realize, that humanity hasn't unified and became a peaceful, prosperous, unified collective of
Right.
people, which if you think about Jesus, that was pretty much his message,
Right.
not to destroy one another, to be unified, whether you believe in the religious ideology or not. But I always found it funny that we idolize that aspect of sacrifice to the point of, romanticizing it with these golden idols and,
I
different
see that a lot in
symbols.
capitalism because you get these people in the world who are like they call it like the grind set like mental mentality like sort of thing. So it's like you got to grind, you got to work hard, like no going out to the clubs, no doing this, no partying, no dating, no nothing. You just got to work, make money, and that's seen as like the ultimate like type of person to be. Like the more you sacrifice, the more you suffer for your goals, the more you're seen as amazing, godlike.
Yeah, and we don't really think of people who, and I'm not talking about the rich elite who, have everything. I'm talking about just ordinary people. If somebody does not suffer in some way, we don't tend to say, as they go through their life without lots of horrific things happening, we don't tend to say, wow, we need to make the world more like everybody can exist like that. We tend to think, oh, this person struggled and um, suffered to get to where they are, and we approve of that rather
Yeah.
than seeing it as, maybe we should change things so that this isn't inherent in the system.
Right. When people are gloating about working three jobs and not having any time for themselves, when they're like, this is my mark of accomplishment, I find that extremely sad.
Yeah, that's a sacrifice. That's sacrificing a lot of your life to get whatever it is that you have, rather than being able to use your life in a much better way to learn and grow and improve and help the collective. It's more just constant struggle, which in itself is not a good form of struggle. It becomes a suffering because that's
Becca
all you
Becca
can
said
do.
something really good about saying like yes, they even brag about how little they sleep even. And that reminds me in my early 20s when me and my friends started getting jobs and we really would have conversations about like who worked the most and who slept the littlest and whoever worked the most and slept the least was the goat, the best. It was like I win. And it gets to the point where it's like what are we doing? Are we idolizing suffering? Is that cool? It's cool to like be miserable.
Yeah, because at that point it's no longer struggle, it is suffering when that's part of that system. Were you going to say something,
Well,
Philip?
I was going to say, even when you get to that point where you believe that you are, successful and you're grinding and, you have 80 hours in 1 week, you've just been working nonstop, racking up that overtime, you don't have an opportunity to live life. So really, exactly like what Jan said, you are suffering whether you're consciously aware of it or not. In your mind, you think that you're doing something great, but capitalism is causing you to suffer by sacrificing every bit of time that you have in order to enjoy life. You're trapped in that cycle. And there's a lot of different systems, capitalism, religion, that suffering is, all throughout the system. And so, especially with religion is probably the number one that
Mm-hmm.
has the most suffering. And capitalism certainly has its aspects of suffering as well. But another contradiction that I thought of when I was about ready to leave Christianity when I was a lot younger is I was thinking, why would an all powerful and all loving God allow suffering? Everybody talks about how God is all perfect and the world was created perfect in his image and his vision. And so at one time, I asked one of my family members why God would allow suffering to occur. Why would God allow something like the Holocaust to happen?
Mm-hmm.
And that family member told me that God doesn't intervene in the struggles and the affairs of humanity. And that was like a lightning bolt to my forehead. And it made me think, well, hold on. If God doesn't intervene in the affairs of humanity, I asked, well, then why do we pray? What
Right.
would be the point of prayer? Because if you are praying, you're asking God for something, you're praying and hoping for God to intervene in humanity's affairs, whether that's if you're sick or you're struggling with something, that is a sort of communication with God to try and get
Or even
something,
just
essentially.
the people who pray with like thanks, like thank you God for
Yeah,
all of what you're giving me. Well, if God's not paying attention, if God doesn't, there's nothing, there's no communication line there. It's kind of
yeah.
like on autopilot. Why bother? What did
Well,
Yeah,
and
and
it's all
even in the positive sense where you're praying to God for protection, I mean, what's the point if you're just going to get cancer anyways?
Yeah,
Yeah,
and then it brings me to things like God bless America. I was always asking my religious leaders and my family and stuff, why would God bless America before any other country or any
right.
other region of the world, especially ones where there is so much struggle and so much suffering? And so to lead me back to what I asked that family member, and they answered with God doesn't intervene with the affairs of man. That thing about the Holocaust, why would he allow the Holocaust to happen? There was a phrase that was etched in one of the prison chambers of the Holocaust, and that phrase is, if there is a God, he will have to beg my forgiveness. And
Yeah,
that was carved on the
Nice.
walls of a concentration camp cell during World War II by a Jewish prisoner, no, a prisoner. And that phrase reflects that prisoner's anger and despair with God,
yeah,
and the
Right.
atrocities committed against him and his people,
yeah,
because God would have to allow that to
yeah,
happen.
yeah.
And so, that phrase is really often used to kind of express the existence in the world is incompatible with the existence of an all-powerful and all-loving
Yeah,
God,
oh,
an all-knowing
benevolent.
God.
Yeah,
And so that kind of defeats the purpose of saying God works in strange ways, and that's part of God's plan. If you say, well, he doesn't get involved in the affairs,
yeah.
it's very circular to argue with those
Well,
types of
Well, it's
people.
very biased too, because if God performs the miracle you want, then yeah, it's a miracle. And then if God doesn't do what you really need, then it's like, oh, he's just working in mysterious
well,
ways.
that
It's
rem-
like,
Yeah.
well, that doesn't seem like a very good God to me. It sounds like a very
yeah.
fucking lazy person, if you ask myself.
That reminds me of the you kind of said it a little bit earlier, but a similar analogy is the two like football teams on opposite sides of the field and in their locker rooms, and they're both praying to God to win the game.
Hmm.
And after the game, the winners are the first thing that they say is thank God, thank my parents, thank whatever the coach, but it's always thank God for letting us win. But
Yeah.
the other team had also been praying to God. So what does that mean? So God just didn't listen to them, but God definitely listened to you?
It
I,
just sounds like a weird infliction, like a self-infliction as a collective that we do of this reward and punishment system that isn't really based or grounded in anything, but like our subconscious.
yeah.
And there's a really, really great comment from Elise. Elise said, well, mainstream Christianity has enmeshed itself with capitalism pretty deeply. So it makes sense that people have internalized their worth being reliant on how much they produce. And also, if you spin that a little bit, you see people in churches, giving money and stuff. People also probably feel the more I give to the church, the better Christian I am, the more cleanly I am in God's eyes, or the more righteous I am in God's eyes.
Oh,
You're absolutely right. Capitalism and religion are so enmeshed. You see people
well,
like Joel Olstein
mm-hmm.
and all these other mega billionaire millionaire church pastors, that
Yeah.
are
Those
very
money,
obviously, oh yeah,
Oh
those,
very
yeah, it's like
obviously taking
yeah,
advantage.
yeah, the
the
money pastors.
the
They
Mormon
preach that.
church requires that its members gives them 10% of their income. Now, 10% of your income, if you're well off, is no problem. But they're also requiring that from people who just really cannot financially afford that. But they keep telling them, if you continue to give the 10%, God will provide for you. And yeah, God does quote unquote provide for them in the form of church service, where a church member will come over and they will give you like food stamps, or like they'll help you out with your rent and stuff. So it's not really giving them a sense of like they're progressing. It's just constantly keeping them in that status of like dependency on God and on the church
Yeah.
system itself.
And also, I think, sorry, just
No, go
to
ahead, go ahead.
talk about this just
Yeah.
real quick. I think also right now, while we're talking about religion having a lot of suffering in it, we're kind of firsthand thinking about the institutions of religion. But if you think all throughout history, if you think of all the suffering and the struggle that religion has created, whether it's through religious holy wars, whether it's different burnings of people and sacrifices of people, not just Jesus,
Mhm.
but different people that were seen as heretics, people that were seen as witches, or all sorts of things throughout history that has been incurred by suffering as a result of religion,
Yeah.
especially the holy wars. Think of how many millions and millions of people have died in the name of some god.
Hmm.
I always think of this George Carlin skit where he says there are countless military cemeteries that are full of dead soldiers that thought that God was on their side. We pray
Well,
to God to destroy our enemies. They pray to their God to destroy us. One of them is wasting our time. Could it be everyone?
Well, it's going on today with the war in Ukraine. It's all based on Russia believing that Ukraine is part of Mother Russia, and that is their God-given right. God decreed this is Mother Russia. Ukraine should be a part of that. Ukraine's like, no, no, thank you, and that's what's initiating this war. So we're still having holy wars to this very fucking day.
Yeah. And so I also think of the author Stephen Fry. He's not necessarily a philosopher, but he's a very philosophical person. He's written a lot of books. He's an actor, and he has some great arguments against religion. I think he's an atheist, but
Yeah.
one of the quotes that he said, he was arguing against the church, and he said, how dare God create a world in which there's such misery? It's not our fault. It's not right. It's utterly, utterly evil. Why should I respect a capricious, mean minded, stupid God who creates a world which is so full of injustice and pain? You can't
Yeah.
say there's a God because the world is beautiful. You have to account for bone cancer in children. Yes, the world is very splendid, but it also has insects whose life cycle is to burrow into the eyes of children and make them blind. They eat their eyes outward, or they eat outward from the eyes. Why? Why did you do that to us? You could have easily made a creation in which that didn't exist. It's simply not acceptable. So,
Yeah.
you were about to say
Even,
something, Susan?
yeah, even the argument back, which you might get to that, which is that, well, God didn't do that. That's because of man's sin. That created
Yeah.
everything. My point is that by now, couldn't especially after Jesus, couldn't you take all that stuff back then? Take that away? Get rid of those awful, awful things?
Yeah.
And people who are very religious who will defend that really just don't want to go there. They do that, well, mysterious things we don't want to we don't want to think about it, because I've asked people, because this one always bothers me, what happens when a baby is born, has done nothing, hasn't barely existed, and dies of starvation in a camp somewhere in a drought in Africa?
I
Start.
mean, a lot of Christianity, I think that I'm not quite sure with mainstream Christianity. I know with Mormonism, they believe in a pre-life in which you were actually a part of like the war in heaven, and that you're here on Earth because you chose to come down here on Earth. But there was a point in the pre-life where there was still some judgment if you were righteous or not righteous. So Mormons really do believe that if you're born a Black African child starving, you were not righteous in your pre-life. So
That's
pretty much everybody born into poverty in this horrible situations, that's a punishment for what you've done in the pre-life.
what a convenient way of dismissing that. you know
Mm-hmm.
little bit sus. um and
And
easy.
I just think religion is weird in general, especially with the promise of heaven. They always talk about heaven being a perfect place. It's absolute perfection. You can go there and be with God and walk with animals and stuff. But I always, even as a child, when I was religious, I found that weird. And so it sounds to me like their idea of heaven is there is no imperfection, no flaws, no struggle, but you need struggle. Struggle is inherently necessary for growth and evolution. But when we're thinking about heaven, It's a completely perfect realm with no flaws and no struggles at all. And that just seems so weird to me because it would be a place
Yeah.
of stagnation.
Yeah.
Nothing would happen, no purpose could be attained. And really, if you think about it, there's absolutely no way that heaven could be perfect, even by the doctrine of religion. You know, their own holy texts have proof of that. And I have an example. So, in pretty much all Judeo Christian religions, they talk about the rebellion of Lucifer and his angels. And so, the very fact that Lucifer and his band of angels could rebel against God and seek more power kind of proves that greed and jealousy and corruption can exist in heaven. So, even by their own mouths, by their own doctrine, they prove that heaven cannot be a totally perfect realm. You know, it seems so weird, like
Yeah.
a fish on a hook to try and carrot to people, you know, to get people into this system. But it's just very weird to me, very strange.
Well, that's why I think religion is just like it's so weird to me how people view it as just like the natural law of the land when it's so obvious to me personally that it's just very unnatural and man-made. Obviously
Yeah.
it's a system made to just keep people content with living in utter shit.
I'm sorry, I was getting ready to cough,
Oh,
so
that's all right.
just
Yeah,
try not to.
I think it's. I still think that it's definitely the biggest system that has suffering and struggle
Mm-hmm.
because you see
Mm-hmm.
everything that's come out of it, you know. And that's not to say that there are some people who don't use religion for good purposes. They do charities and stuff, and that's all fine and dandy. But you have to look at the consequences of what the guilt and the shame does, and you know the different consequences that it has on the world. I know we mentioned holy wars as a big aspect of that, but if you look at what's happening in Iran, you know, it's because of their religious beliefs that they're inflicting so much oppression on women, you know, and that happens in a lot of areas of the world, but we see that in the news a lot lately. But it's a big problem. I don't necessarily know any other way that we can get past that other than attaining hyper awareness of elevating the consciousness of humanity to realize that these systems like religion, like capitalism, are not serving us to their fullest potential, or really not serving us at all, that we don't need them.
I want to say something, but I'm so close to coughing again.
Oh, that's all
Oh
right.
no.
I'm
Well,
sorry.
we can take a look at the comments really quick. I saw Mark
Yeah.
said lots of internal contradictions, which is absolutely true. And that's pretty much the primary cause of why I left religion, because as a lot of the things that I've mentioned today, those were some of the biggest contradictions that I saw that I couldn't overcome and stay with religion. You know, I was asking all these questions and I got the answers like God doesn't intervene in the affairs of man. Well, right there, that wiped out, you know, the purpose of prayer for me. And it almost made me feel like, so all the prayers that I've ever done my whole life, you know, are kind of
Waste of
tossed in a
time.
waste. Oh, yeah, tossed in a waste bin in heaven somewhere, and just said, well, I can't intervene in any of those, but I read them.
But how do they also explain how, when they tell you maybe you were in a different kind of Christianity, but how do they also explain that God's listening to you all the time? God knows what you're thinking, God's paying attention, and then those people are terrified.
Yeah. I don't know. There's so many weird aspects to it because then you have
It's
some
just a form
people.
of control.
Yeah, and it's weird when you start getting into that because then you have people that say, "Oh, I talk to God," or "Oh, I hear God's voice," and stuff like that. And I think Lee actually sent a super chat a little while ago. Thank you, Lee. I saw you had to leave because you were driving, but we appreciate the super chat. And Lee said, Humanity has spent millennia confused about their inner dialogue and intrusive loose thoughts, confused for a lifetime, sad and distressing." And that's absolutely true. Absolutely true. You know, that inner dialogue that a lot of people probably do confuse, and they do confuse with their idea of God, you know.
Right, because there's a lot of subconscious to humanity that we haven't tapped into yet. And the more we start tapping into that and realizing that it's not some omnipotent like external being from us and realize it's ourselves, I think that's where the true sort of godliness is going to start shining through. And we'll find out that we don't rely on some mysterious God to do things for us. We realize we are God and we start accomplishing the miracles for ourselves with our own hands.
I think we should also, and you touched on it a bit, but discuss the difference between suffering and struggle. Sorry
Yeah.
about my
That was
voice.
something. Okay, so I think you all need to know, like, we've actually been having this conversation like last night and then like a whole hour before this live stream, because we started like getting into this topic, and then me and Susan got at it, and not in a bad,
Oh
but we weren't
no,
arguing or anything. Like,
no.
this is just like debate, not even really debate, just like
It was
conversation.
awesome. We should have been
It's
live. It
actually
was a
really
great
because
hour. You guys missed it.
yeah, because Susan's talking about the like the idea of like suffering and suffering in nature and suffering in man-made systems, suffering in nature systems, and I'm like, well, what is suffering? Because Susan, what's that quote from that guy you wanted to
Okay,
bring up?
Joseph Campbell has a quote. I have the whole thing. It's kind of long. I'll just paraphrase it. This is something that my husband, who is a very big Joseph Campbell fan, always would tell me because my husband did a lot of work out firefighting in the woods, in the forests in British Columbia, and he would come back and say, Joseph Campbell's quote about existence, life, nature being brutal and being full of suffering, having a suffering component. And then there's all the naturists who, when they show you I always think of the savannah with the lions eating the zebra. So nature, my view of suffering is that there's two parts. There's the nature part, which is existence itself, the way the planet evolved. So that, and this is what Joseph Campbell was talking about in this quote, when he points out that life, in order to exist, must consume other life. It's brutal. It's just inherent in it. You can't get around it. If you do not consume other life, you will die. Everything is about life consuming life. And he also says really great stuff about it. That it's crazy, it's chaotic, but it's exhilarating. My God, here we are. Like grab it.
And that's at the point, like Susan's bringing up that thing, and I'm just like, no, hang on a minute, because I'm thinking, is nature inherently cruel all the time? Because I understand it as the very nature to be very unconscious at the moment. Like, it's very mathematical. It's it does have rationality to it. It is reasoned, but it's very unconscious. So like, I'm like, hang on a minute, because a lion eating a zebra to me doesn't necessarily classify as suffering. To me, that seems like a struggle. And perhaps the zebra is suffering as it's being eaten. I mean, who wouldn't suffer from that? But I'm trying to think of it. We were going back and forth, and then I think we finally came to the conclusion that it's there's suffering in the individual experience. Like, the individual zebra is experiencing suffering. But then when you take
Right.
a step back and you look at things in a more like absolute perspective, I'm looking at zebra species as a whole, and I'm seeing it as a genuine struggle to learn how to avoid predators better, rather than it being like a savage suffering that nature is. Like, nature is ultimately cruel. I feel like that's a little bit too of a moralistic description for something that's unconscious.
Well,
Whereas like
yeah.
something that's conscious, to me, that's a conscious suffering, would be the way that us humans are consciously treating the planet, causing global warming, environmental problems, and causing unnecessary suffering on the animals.
And my point, and what we finally came to, is that we kept saying, I see your point, I see your point,
Yeah,
but
it was a lot of back
but
and forth.
but this is such an interesting topic, just this itself, that we may do a live stream on it, because I'm so curious to see what you guys say about this. But about suffering inherent in nature and what that means, and in relation to struggle as well. But my point was, and this is where we finally got to an understanding right before the live stream started, is that Jan, you were coming from looking at a species as a whole, struggling to survive, to keep going on. And that, I completely agree with that, because that is the survival of the fittest. It's been noted that is what happens. You want to pass on those genes that will then continue the species. Whereas what I was focusing on is, and what I think a lot of people think of, and what Joseph Campbell was talking about, was that just the idea of life needing to consume life. You need to kill and
Yeah.
consume life. So that is from the individual perspective of the And we've all seen those nature shows where the zebra's down and the hyenas are eating it. And that's the suffering that Joseph Campbell was talking about, that's inherent in a system in which life must consume life. So when we
Well, I
finally
think when you're
realized,
talking
sorry,
I think when you're talking about it being inherent in the system, Morg says, yeah, Jan seems to be speaking of intentionally inflicting suffering, whereas this is about the subjective experience of suffering. Is that what you
exactly.
mean?
Right, exactly.
And
Because
we got
in my
there.
mind, I'm like, the lion is not intentionally inflicting suffering. It's just trying to fucking eat, you know?
Yeah, and then we had another a few minutes of discussion where I said, "Oh, I'm not trying to say that lions should not be eating zebras. In fact, the people who try to get carnivores to not be carnivores
The
is,
weird ultra vegans that feed their dogs like
yes, they're going to
plant-based
kill
food
them. That's
or their cats. We're
yeah.
just like,
I don't want to get into a discussion about that, but
no, 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 we're not trying to go there, but we're
I'm
just,
not saying, yeah, I'm absolutely not blaming lions for eating zebras. That's what they're meant to do, and or antelopes or whatever, and that's how the life balances. You know that you
which
need.
I would classify that as natural suffering. And I remember you brought up a good point about like what happens if a woman gets uterine cancer? Is that suffering? And I think there is a point where that is natural suffering. Obviously, you're experiencing pain and torment from the cancer cells. But I think the unnatural suffering comes from the way our medical system is severely lacking, and people are having to suffer unnecessarily, and that's inflicting suffering. And
Yeah.
that's a kind of an area
Yeah.
where I think we can change quite
Yes,
a
that's
bit,
intersectional.
quite a lot. Yeah.
Same with environment. So I was talking earlier about volcanoes and hurricanes and things, fires like Maui, where we just heard about, which is just devastating. But a lot of that is nature. However, it intersects with what we have done, terrible things to the planet to screw it up. So like that other situation, this is where there's both of the components. There's cases where both sides meet, and I think, and what time is it? Oh wow, we've really been talking. But I think that when we ended up right before we started this live stream was a better understanding of what I mean, what I'm talking about, and with suffering in nature, and what the struggle part of nature. And I also want to point out that it isn't all suffering. If existence was only suffering, we would probably all just jump off the cliff. I mean, it would be awful. There's lots of other stuff. There's the nurturing. There's, having young. And this is not just in people,
Well,
but
that's evolution in
yeah,
general. You evolve because there's discomfort, there's suffering, there's struggle, and
Yeah.
you're trying to get past that to achieve like a more homeostasis, like where
yeah,
everything's all right and
yeah.
nice and balanced and you're thriving. So
But
that's you can't have evolution without frustration, struggle, and even suffering.
and so back to what's the difference between suffering and struggle, is that there's a lot of suffering that can be eliminated. Now, again, I'm not trying to take zebras away from lions and the fact that they need to eat, but once you become conscious and hyper aware, and you realize now, you see it out there, you understand that we're a collective, you gain this knowledge. That's when you start to look around and say, oh, okay, what can we do? I mean, we can't keep hurricanes from happening, like, in general. We can change what we have done that causes extra unnecessary components with that. But certainly the man-made components of suffering, which we've talked,
Yeah.
which is the other part, the second part, there's the nature part and then there's the man-made part. So religion, the issues that perpetuate suffering, and then capitalism I look at as like an umbrella, causes so many issues of suffering, different kinds of suffering.
There's a lot of different areas to it.
Yeah. So as a collective, we look around once we realize what's happening and where we've evolved to. As Neogenians, when we recognize what we are, that we are zetas, and we are also coming to the point where we're going to explain the Neogenian perspective of
Hi, Mom Mitchell.
suffering.
Thanks for joining.
Hi, Mom. So we're getting to where we're going to tell you what the Neogenian is. We understand the religious point. We went through that, where they come from with why suffering exists. But once we recognize that as a collective, then we start changing the world. We say, what can we change to reduce suffering? I don't think we can eliminate it completely, but we can reduce a lot of suffering, unnecessary suffering, and certainly the things that systems we've created that allow suffering, that perpetuate suffering, which are just horrific. All of the, poverty and starvation and, just as a collective on the entire planet, to take care of each other, all of the wildlife and the planet itself. It's not just make sure everybody is clothed and has food. Of course we have to do that. We want everybody thriving, and we talk about this a lot, but we also have to take care of this planet. And that kind of goes into the, where do we put our resources? Morg's talked about this on their channel, about the super rich people who just want to like explore space, and really what we need to be doing is focusing on growing this planet into a better world.
Consciousness comes with a lot of responsibility, and I think we're kind of not doing so well as a human race collectively right now. It's extremely unbalanced.
Well, we're in a very tumultuous time where there's like this massive war between the old and the new, and that's what we are. Yeah. We are the new beginning.
Of change.
We are, and old things don't die without a struggle. They don't die without kicking and screaming and fighting, and that is what the old systems are doing. They don't want to give up, and it's fear-based. They don't want to give up, and also power and control-based. They don't want to lose out so that other people can have, and that's something that you really only understand once you've raised your consciousness and realized that we are a collective. We are it, and we're all in this together. There is nobody who's apart from that should have everything. So I know we're running out of time. Let's just
before we move on too far, I did want to say Becca left a nice comment. Becca, thank you for being a member for 6 months at the waveform level. And Becca said, such a great and important topic. Thank you all for talking about it. I'm very happy and grateful to be a Neogenian. Thank you for that. And we're happy
Becca.
and grateful that you joined and that you're here with us, and that all of you are here with us and supporting our channel, and putting your thoughts in the comments. We appreciate all of you guys' comments, everything that you guys add to the conversation. We try and look at your comments as much as we can. And also thank you to Archetype Zero for your super chat. Says great topic. Thank you for that very much.
Yeah,
and it's not over. I think we're going to have a second part to this discussion, because when I was first presented with this, like, why do we suffer? My thing first was, what is suffering exactly? And that's where we kind of like, not divided in a bad way, but we just kind of divided in thoughts, like, and just started comparing them, like, well, what about this? What about this? What about that? And I think we want to continue to have that
discussion,
detailed discussion next time.
Yeah, I kind of wish we had it. It was a great hour of just throwing our ideas out there, and we both.
And I was curious about the differences, so I even typed into AI, what is the difference?
Oh, share that.
Struggle. I'll have to type it in again really quick, and it was kind of long, but it gave me a summary.
Whoa, Morg!
Wow, thanks, Morg.
Wow, thank you so much. Yeah, Kate, record it next time. Morg, thank you. Oh my God. We really appreciate it. Oh, somebody's giving hearts and everything. Thank you. Hi, Cassidy.
Oh, yeah, that is awesome. Thank you, Morg.
Thank you so much. Hi, Eric. Hi, Melinda.
Everybody put those little Rubik's Cubes in the chat. Put all the emojis if you want.
Yeah, put all the emojis, all of them. All of them.
Wonderful. That's amazing. Thank you guys so much for the support.
Oh, I don't have those.
And so, really quick, I'll read this little AI summary. The answer it gave me is actually a few paragraphs long, but it says, in summary, suffering is the experience of pain or distress, while struggle is the active effort and perseverance in the face of challenges. Suffering is often seen as negative and something to be alleviated, whereas struggle can be viewed as valuable and a transformative process. And I really like that, because we actually do need struggle to be able to overcome different obstacles and
Oh
evolve
yeah.
as minds and as a collective.
I think next time we will talk. Oh, more like that. Yeah, right. That was a very cool thing from AI. I think next time we'll talk even more about the difference between struggle and suffering, because it's a very important distinction. And also, we will recreate a lot of our talk about it, because it was great. We were just slinging our
Yeah.
ideas back and forth.
We should have had the live stream the hour before we started the
I
live
know.
stream, because
Yeah.
it was really intense and
Yeah.
it was really good.
We came in an hour early to talk, and it was fantastic. But what we'll do is kind of have it again, but with you guys, because I really want the input, and I know
Hmm.
that you guys are really good at adding your own thoughts and adding into the discussion. And lately, we haven't had as much time to go into the comments, so we will make sure that we do it and take more time to stop and really talk with you guys about it. And hi, there was somebody new. Hi, Jeannie. I don't think I said hi to you. And I think we'll probably get going. I just wanted to say one thing, because I think also there's a lot more to talk about that theme of sacrifice, which I find
Yeah.
fascinating, that it's such a integral part of all of history, like the amount of religions that have sacrifices in them for different
Right,
reasons.
because I could say we could start diving into that deeper too, because like I feel like we could break it into like a unhealthy sacrifice and an actual healthy sacrifice, because in some cases I think sacrifice would help you progress.
I would. That was for Coco. That Coco was for
I
Cassidy.
also like the aspect of sacrifice being embedded in the mythos of
Yeah,
our ancient history.
yeah.
Hmm.
That theme is
Very
something.
archetypal.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that I'm very interested in that, and I will give you guys homework if you want to do it. If you don't have to, but before the next time that we talk about this, because there's two short stories that came to mind um, for when I was thinking about suffering and sacrifice, and these are fantastic stories. I think you can get them online, or not very much, or in a compilation, or take it out of the library, whatever. All right, so they're two short stories. The first one is by Ursula Le Guin, and I recommend this so much. My best friend's daughter asked me one day if I'd ever read it. I guess she read it in high school, and it's called "The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas." I'm going to put it in the chat. The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas by Ursula Le Guin. I think I got that right. Okay, so there's that one. You'll really enjoy it, even if we talk about that in and of itself. During the next discussion, anyone who's read it can tell me it moved me. Oh my God, when I
I
read
think there's
that.
some YouTube or like some video adaptations out there that you
Yeah,
can listen to.
probably. I'm really, really curious for, yeah, ASMR, Cassidy. Okay, the second story is much more well known, I think, and a lot of you may have already read it or seen the short movie on it. And it's by Shirley Jackson, and it's called The Lottery. The Lottery by Shirley Jackson. She wrote The Haunting of Hill House. I think it's called The Haunting of Hill House. And We've Always Lived in the Castle. She writes these dark stories, but this is a short story, and you can also see the movie version of it for free. I think it's on YouTube somewhere. It's called The Lottery. Yeah, I know, Mark. I'm not surprised you know that story. Whoops. I got to type it in. The Lottery. And again, disturbing. but makes you think a lot. And it's about both these stories are suffering and sacrifice. So anybody who does read them before we do our next live stream, I'm not really sure when that's going to be. Philip has to work next week, so it's definitely not that one, but maybe the one after. I would love it if you guys like to read and you read it and can give input of how you felt about it. And I'm curious to know. So, thank you guys. Yeah, I'll come back, and I think the live chat should still be playing if you forget, or message me if you don't have them written down, and I will tell you. Yeah, Katrina, I have not read enough by Ursula Le Guin. I know about her. She's a very cool person, or was a very cool person. I would love to read more of her books. You'll like that story, or it will move you anyway. I'm glad you enjoyed the stream, Morgan. Thank you so much again. You guys are awesome.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for everyone who gifted memberships and super chatted and liked the video, shared the video. I know we posted it a little early this time.
And feel free.
Your support means a lot.
Yeah, feel free to write comments. And there's also something else. I just want to see if... Yes, Corvus is still in here. Corvus, you wrote a really good comment on a question on one of our videos, I think a recent one. And I would like to, hi Corvus, I want to address it. It's the confirming the difference or the definitions of reality tunnel and was it personal mythos? And I thought, and you wanted to make sure you got it straight. I have not forgotten. I'll give you an answer there, but also we'll add it to our agenda for next time. And so I hope you'll come and we will answer that. It was a really good question for anybody who doesn't quite understand the difference between those. So we hope to see, Morg said good question. It is a good question. How those two relate. So good. Yeah, great. We'll see you next time then, I hope. Guys, it's been awesome. I think this has probably been one of my favorite streams. I love talking to you both. And
yeah,
I think so too.
Yeah, we had fun with this.
If you guys have comments or questions, feel free to comment on the video after we're done. You know, we can always come back and talk to you more in the comments.
Absolutely. Yeah, we've been going on this for 2 hours now because we started an hour before. So it's a wonderful topic. I'm glad you guys liked it. Thank you so much. We're heading out, and we'll see you maybe in 2 weeks. Okay, and see you at see you on Monday at Morg's stream. All right, good night, everyone. Bye.
Bye.